here today. Huge thanks as well to SME4Labour and also to Melton for co-hosting this event. My name's Mark Sewards. I'm the Labour MP for Leeds South West and Morley, elected in July, as so many of us were. I'm delighted to be joined today by our expert panel. Now, we've got one speaker who needs to run off, so I'm going to introduce them first, and it's Perran Moon. He's very kindly stepped in at the last moment for somebody who stepped out. So, Perran, I'm going to hand over to you. He's got 15 minutes, and then he's running out the door. Over to you, Perran.
So, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I don't think this is going to take 15 minutes, so we'll make up some time. But I was really keen to step in anyway. My constituency, Camborne, Redruth and Hale, in the far southwest of Cornwall, is Labour's most southerly constituency in the United Kingdom. It's made up of two quite large but very quite deprived towns and a lot of rural area, a lot of farms, and we talk regularly to the farming community about how we help them diversify their businesses. We've got biomass operations running within the constituency. We're really keen to support them as best we can to make sure that diversification is continuing. We've got opportunities across the range of renewable energy sectors, and we're really keen to work with all of those businesses that are involved. We've got our own challenges as well around our location. We're surrounded by sea on three sides, so with one main road in and out and one rail system in and out, which doesn't always work very well. So we have to think creatively about how we approach our economy and how we approach the impact of what we're doing on our natural environment. And this is where biomass comes in really centrally to this. So we're very, very keen to make sure that we're working. It's not, we're working across a range of different models, but we've got a lot of interest, we've got a lot of support from the local community, from the farming community, to make sure that we're making the most of the resources that we have.
Fantastic. Thank you, Perran. So at this point, just before I introduce our next speaker, I'll get a little bit more background about our event today. So Melton, who are partnering with SME4Labour for this, are one of the biggest and most diverse biomass-only fuel power station companies. They have the largest portfolio of power stations fueled only by biomass in the UK. So they're generating 111 megawatts of renewable baseload energy to the grid. But this is all under threat. Any organisation that's using biomass at the moment is subject to the Renewable Obligation Certificate scheme, and this is ending in 2027. The last government left a policy void for up to 2 years in which they didn't renew the scheme and didn't indicate what they would do. And of course, if those certificates aren't renewed, this energy generation will end. Now, we're trying to move towards sustainable energy. We know that that's one of Labour's core missions, so that if we end up losing the energy generation that Melton brings and those other companies bring, we're going to be in some serious trouble trying to hit that 2030 target. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Eddie Wilkinson. Eddie is the CEO of Melton and has lots of expertise in this area, and I'll just hand over to him now.
Hi there, thanks for coming. I'm not sure I've got expertise, but I've got a lot of experience in this area. I've been CEO for 20 years of Melton, as Mark says, 111 megawatts. Annually, we produce about 780 gigawatt hours a year, which is equivalent to about powering a city the size of Liverpool with a little bit more. So reasonably sizable, not massive, not as big as a nuclear station, but over the piece is quite an important contributor to the UK's energy security. We do that through using about 1 million tonnes a year of sustainable, land-neutral, clean biomass. In essence, about half of that, just over half, is poultry litter. So I think it's important to draw distinctions between what we do and chopping trees down. We're not growing trees, chopping them down and using that to create energy. We're using agricultural waste and residues, and where they would traditionally just get spread to land uncontrolled, we're using them to generate power. As Mark alludes, as of April 27, the Renewable Obligation Scheme will start to close, and close fully between 27 and 37. As an early adopter, we will be off-grid and not generating from that point on. So from midnight on the 31st of March, our operations will cease because it will cease to get revenue support and it will cease to make any money. And I think it's an important point. If we want to be sustainable, and Labour has set an aspiration and an ambitious target of being a clean energy superpower, I don't think the natural first step in that journey is to lose a gigawatt. I mean, we're only 0.1 of a gigawatt, but to lose a gigawatt of sustainable, renewable biomass generation in the early days. Because although 2030 seems a long time off, in infrastructure terms, 6 years is nothing. So you'll be taking a natural step back. In terms of the scale of the challenge, to hit net zero and to hit zero emissions from the grid by 2030, last Monday, demand across the UK was about 32 gigawatts, of which a third came from gas. If you're going to get a clean grid, the gas needs to come off. And if you're going to take off sustainable biomass as well, that will need to be replaced by presumably wind and solar. Wind and solar is intermittent. There's not a lot of solar today, as you've seen the skies outside. There's actually not a lot of wind out there today either, so you need to replace that with something that is baseload generation, such as sustainable biomass. So I think we have been campaigning into a vacuum for 2.5 years now. Last government was incapable of making a decision, and their offices weren't interested. They made it a policy differential between their manifesto and Labour's. Labour's got big ambitions, but I think it now needs to start making some decisions, and I think it's got the mandate to do so with its huge majority. So that's where we are. In terms of what else we do, in terms of renewables and sustainability, a byproduct of our process, so we take 1 million tonnes a year of sustainable biomass. We create about 70,000 tonnes of P&K potash and phosphate fertiliser, what we sell to British agriculture. It's about 10% of the UK fertiliser market by volume. If farmers weren't using that, they'd be importing mined alternatives, which is energy intensive and not great in terms of security of supply, in terms of UK sourced product. On top of that, and as a final aside, the business has been generating since the early 90s, so we've been there 30 odd years. We have 200 fantastic direct employees, support a lot more indirect employees as well. So the sustainable biomass market is quite key to a lot of rural jobs. So it's a plea to Labour and to start the discussion and start a debate really to get that policy changed. Because if not, we're going to sleepwalk into April 27 and the loss of a lot of generation, a lot of jobs, and worsening the grid in terms of its clean credentials.
Thank you very much. That's really enlightening. We are going to come to questions very soon, but just before we do, I'd now like to introduce Noah Law, who's joining us. Noah, would you like to make your contribution?
Thanks, Mark. So I'm Noah Law, St Austell and Newquay MP, and not far from Perran in Cornwall. So whilst I might not in my constituency have some of the quite innovative biomass sites that are on offer in Camborne and Redruth, Cornwall is, of course, a sort of ripe environment for biomass, not just because of our potential need for off-grid energy and heat, but also because we have so many of the feedstocks and the potential circular economy opportunity associated with it as well. So we've mentioned the byproduct of phosphate fertilisers that can feed back into the agricultural economy. And I'm lucky enough to have also worked to a light extent, I would say, with biomass in a previous life in working in developing countries as well. So I've seen the model in action, and I've seen how useful it can be for more dispersed industrial businesses as well, of which we have many in the St Austell and Newquay constituency. So I think it's really important that we get this right. It's needed for all of that those localised elements I've just mentioned, but also is a critical part of the baseload power mix in the UK as well. It's concerning to see, I think, sleepwalking not just on biomass, but also on biofuels as well, which has been discussed at this conference. That we're sleepwalking into potential policy black holes on this, and also biofuels, which I'm happy to touch on later as well.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you, all three. Do you need to run? Yes. That's why we thought we'd get your contributions in first. Thank you so much. Right, so I'm minded to take any questions you like from the audience. We have a roving mic, and I also have some suggested questions here too that I'll start with while you're thinking of yours. The first question I've got is for Eddie. We know that the licences are expiring in 2027. If we wait until 2027 to renew them, that doesn't give much time for planning. when is the ideal time, other than now, of course, to renew these licenses?
In reality, I think the ideal time was probably about 6 to 12 months ago.
Right.
These are long-term infrastructure assets, to be fair. A lot of fuel, if you've got a million tonnes of fuel to run your power stations, you need to have contracts in place. All our contracts run until 31st of March 27, where we've got long-term contracts in place. Thank you. Our suppliers, the poultry industry, is looking for homes for their litter. So we take 550,000 tonnes a year, which is quite a lot of litter. If we don't contract for that, that will go elsewhere. Where it will end up will be getting spread to land, uncontrolled. I'll ask you to Google Lough Neagh in Northern Ireland and the River Wye in the west, where animal waste is spread to land willy-nilly, without control, and the runoff produces nitrogen runoff in the water, and ultimately algae is produced. It dies, starves the rivers and watercourses of oxygen, and literally kills these watercourses and rivers. That hasn't happened in the east. Our plants were designed in the 90s and located close to the host fuels. So the East Anglian chicken industry, the straw production in East Anglia and Ely, where we have a straw burner. So they're designed and located close to the fuel. I think elsewhere where there isn't a home and a host for that litter and that straw, you end up with runoff and you end up with problems with rivers and watercourses. So I think that's as an aside. You also have the risk of avian flu. So one of the links from litter to avian flu, that's a key risk in terms of storage of litter off-site. We are there 24/7, 365, taking litter and putting it through a process and dealing with it. The poultry industry has a requirement 5 days a week to have that litter removed from its site so it can restock sheds. If it can't give it to us, it will end up in storage. There's only twice a year it can get spread to land, really, because the land's either too wet or it's got crops on it. So it's spread generally, I would say, April, early parts of May, at the end of the spring harvest, or it's in August and September at the end of the summer harvest to get spread to land. In between those times, it's stored, and whilst it's being stored, it's an environmental risk in terms of both avian flu and the runoff. So we are a one-stop shop. We'll take it all the time because their throughput matches our requirements. If we're not there, their throughput will continue. So yeah.
Very good.
So I need an answer pretty quickly, really, because we've told people Q1 next year, but in reality, we'd have liked an answer before this.
Okay, so Q1 next year would be better than, yeah, okay.
Well, I mean, the other issue is keeping people employed. I mean, our workforce is sat there every day, come to work with a threat over their heads that, well, come April 27, this place is shutting. What are we going to do? It's got no fuel, it's got no revenue stream, or it's got a limited revenue stream, it doesn't match its costs. Some vote with their feet. So motivating and retaining and keeping and attracting staff is quite difficult, as you can imagine.
Yes. Okay, so we've talked there about the licenses and the problem that we'll have if we don't renew them, and essentially we'll just lose all that capacity that you've added over the years. So this is a question for...
And you lose the skills, you know, the
Absolutely.
jobs will go, the skills will go, the apprentices will go. So it's a big issue in terms of jobs and skills in this increasing market, to be fair.
Absolutely. So following on from that, how will the sustainable biomass sector help the government actually achieve clean power in 2030? Can it go beyond the capacity that it's generating now?
Well, I think the number we're looking at is 2.9 gigawatts thereabouts, isn't it? So it's very much not the be all and end all. Of course, things like natural gas will still have to play an important role in the baseload mix, but the cleaner we can get that, the better, and baseload is really critical to making sure that when we are, for example, using GB Energy to support our goal in renewables like offshore wind and solar, that we've got that baseload in place, because actually I can't stress the importance of baseload enough, because the grid challenges that we face as well in making the renewables ecosystem work are just so immense, and I think there's a lot of concern that we're not perhaps going far enough on the grid side. How we mitigate that, part of that can actually be through off-grid energy and more localised solutions like biomass.
Okay, yeah, very good. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, I'll reiterate that as of currently the grid runs at about 300 grams of carbon per kilowatt hour. So you need to get the 300 down to 0. The big contributor to that is gas, so you need less gas. I'm a big supporter of solar and wind, so I'm not saying we shouldn't have that, but it's about getting the right mix. So if you look at last week's grid during the day, about a third was gas, solar was about 10%, biomass was about 10%, wind was down about 7% the early part of last week, and you've got about 33%, which is a combination of imports from Europe and nuclear. So I think you need a mix. You do need baseload power, you're quite right. So if you lose biomass, which is about 10% of the sort of the summer, early autumn, late spring balance, because demand will increase in winter. So at the moment demand's about 30 gigawatt hours. When you get to winter, it's probably closer to 50. That is produced, the extra 20 gigawatt hours comes from gas currently. So you've got a massive challenge to get from your current mix of power to where you need to get to be clean. So you've got a lot of solar, a lot of wind, but that's all intermittent, which is putting more strain on the grid. Grid is historically dreadfully slow at getting anything done. It takes you 6 months to get a quote out of a DNO, and then probably 2, 3, 4, 5 years for delivery. And I'm not exaggerating, to be fair. So if you're going to get to be clean by 2030, you need to be cracking on now, to be fair. So yeah, it's a big challenge.
I think it's fair to say there's plenty of work taking place on the grid side to try and speed that up, but even that work alone itself takes time. So 2030 is a real, ticking. The time is ticking, really.
Yeah.
A moonshot. Are there any questions from the floor? Excellent. Yes, we'll go to this gentleman here, and then I'll go to the woman at the back.
Matt Baker hello. Sorry, Matt Baker, Director of Public Affairs at Renewable Energy. So we own some biomass as well. Let's hypothetically say ROCs doesn't get renewed, which, given the Chancellor keeps talking about the lack of money, what else? What other options have you explored and looked at in terms of mitigation for that kind of revenue gap?
We've looked at the capacity market. We've looked at REGOs. The gap is massive, to be fair. I think because currently we pay for litre, we probably pay on average maybe £10 a tonne. It takes roughly 2 tonnes of litre to get a megawatt hour of electricity. We calculated we'd need to get a payment from the poultry industry of £20 or £30 a tonne. So that's a swing for them of £40 a tonne. The poultry industry runs on very, very small margins. So unless people want to pay more for their chicken in Tesco's, Asda and Sainsbury's, they haven't got the wherewithal to deal with their litter properly, I would say, and it will take a cheaper option, which will be spread to land, and it's someone else's problem. And ultimately, down the line, we'll have problems with rivers and water quality, and I think we'll walk into that if we're not careful. And it won't be in 2027 or 2028, but down the line, you'll find you've got an issue like you've got the River Wye, you've got in Lockney, because people haven't taken responsible steps to manage their waste processes.
And I think, if I can just add, it's important to see that conversation is being had with DEFRA as well, isn't it? Because ultimately they will inform the unit economics of those feedstocks, and obviously our approach to making farming more sustainable can play a role in that as well.
But I think the problem in terms of water courses will end up being DEFRA's. I think the budget in terms of solving this is probably DESNE's. And I think that's one of the issues we've had for the last 2-3 years, banging heads between various departments.
Very good. Okay, thank you. We had a question at the back as well. To the lady at the back just there.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Steph Moore and I work for the RSPB. Thanks very much for your comments so far. So I totally hear you about the base load and also about the need for the mix, particularly in the transition away from fossil fuels. So I totally get that. But a European Commission report did show that burning of biomass emits significantly more carbon than coal even. And so I'm just thinking about kind of long-term vision, surely kind of investing in ways to manage the intermittent energy from wind and solar, like you talked about, in terms of battery storage, potentially green hydrogen, long storage solutions. is surely the vision that we should be aiming for, even if biomass is part of the mix in the kind of transition. I just wonder what your thoughts were.
In terms of the mass, I would say sustainable land neutral biomass is carbon neutral, and the reason I say that is it's absorbed the carbon over a short period of time, like 12 months, and then we release the carbon when it's burned. So I think at that point it's net zero ultimately, because it's already captured, and then it's a straw and animal bedding, which comes largely from straw and wood shavings. We're already releasing the carbon, it's already captured. If you can then go on in terms of greenhouse gas reduction technology and capture the carbon, you get negative emissions, which is a target for 2035 of 23 million tonnes. So if you haven't got biomass to do that, you'll also miss your carbon reduction targets, and then you'll miss net zero. So I disagree with it. I haven't read the report, to be fair, and I'm going to. So it depends what biomass is, and we're not all the same. There's a difference between taking agricultural wastes and residues and chopping a tree down, right? And I'm quite happy to make that mark in the ground. We aren't doing that. We're doing something else with a waste product.
Yeah, no, I think it does pay to again, perhaps DEFRA's need to look at the most sustainable feedstocks and forms of sequestration that ultimately, yes, do end up being burnt into the atmosphere. But it's a bit similar to some debates that I've had around the incinerator in my constituency, which of course is not the most at the sort of tailpipe. It's not the most carbon efficient form of generating electricity, but it's not really apples to apples in a sense with other forms of thermal power. So I think it's important to sort of recognise that you're not just solving for one thing here, which is low carbon electricity. You're also tackling other circular economy issues by making use of those feedstocks, and in the case of sequestered carbon, it really is net zero at that point.
Okay, we've got a question right at the back, the gentleman at the back.
Yes, hi, Richard Burrell, I'm chairman of Eskin Renewables. I understand that quite a lot of waste wood is being exported at the moment. So have you considered putting forward a tax on a per tonne basis on exports of waste wood as a way to fund the future ROC scheme?
Well, I don't know how impactful that would be to, say, your business, but it's I think that's something important to look into, because there's an awful lot of course, outsourcing of emissions at the minute, and awful lot of us sort of washing our hands of the impacts down the line. So I think that would be something good to look into more. I think the overarching steer on trade policy anyway and sustainable farming seems to be that we are trying to of course level that playing field, and I think we can do the same. We could well do the same for those feedstocks.
Anything you want to add? It's okay.
I'm not an expert on waste wood, so I'm helpful and hoping to get some revenue from somewhere to help support our business. But whether it's waste wood exports, I'm not sure.
We have a question over here next.
Hi, my name is Maddie. I work for the Bioindustry Association. So there are lots of different biotechnology processes that can use biomass other than just burning it to generate power. So my question would be, how can the government support these innovative biotechnology companies that are creating things like bio-based plastic to ensure that they have a good supply of biomass and that they're able to not directly compete with Melton, but ensure that there's some sustainability there?
What do you reckon?
Well, I'm pretty sure there's quite a lot of biomass out there, and there's quite a lot of poultry that isn't being managed properly further west in the country. So I don't think there's a shortage of we're not taking all of it. So it's not as if we've captured the 100% of the market in terms of litter. So I think there's plenty out there. I think you need to speak to probably some people in the poultry industry and see if you can get some trials done, to be fair.
No, I just echo that. I don't think it's the supply that is a real constraint there. So plenty of room from that perspective for everyone. But I do think you raise an important point that we should probably be thinking much more strategically about how we make use of that biomaterial, because there is actually a vast amount currently not being utilised, which I think is why this is such a. I think I heard this morning that 2.9 million homes alone could be supported by biofuels from those feedstocks. So it's almost nascent at the minute, and I think there's plenty of room for everyone in the market, it would seem.
Thank you. Questions? I know that we had, yes, sorry, gentleman in the grey jacket there. He's been waiting a while, yes.
Hi, my name is Richard King. I'm from SGN. We're a gas network that operates in southern England and Scotland. I suppose, picking up on the previous question, actually, my question was about biomethane and the panel's views on that. At the moment, sort of pretty unstrategically, we have about the equivalent of 300,000 plus households supplied with biomethane just in our network alone. As the panel's already mentioned, the production of biomethane can be done in a way which is actually net negative, and obviously it's at the moment injected into the gas network, which is predominantly fossil gas, but that network can then be used for peaking plants and things like that to help keep the lights on. So my question is, if things like the RO are coming to an end, there is a green gas support scheme at the moment, government have consulted on the successor to that from 2026. What opportunities might there be to instead look to sort of green the gas in our networks, which is obviously a mature technology that many users in the UK are using at the moment?
Any thoughts?
Well, I have to say biomethane isn't necessarily something I know much about the sort of economics of for the UK. I know there's a lot of innovation taking place in that. I mean, it would be actually interesting to pick up separately about the opportunity there, because I mean there's a lot of innovation that's gone on. It's quite nascent technology, but as you say, the fact that you don't have to perhaps a counter argument to hydrogen being, which you can only sort of mix in to a certain extent, is can you harness those technologies to work with the existing grid network, because I know that is a big concern around other emerging technologies such as hydrogen, for example, the state of the grid.
Thank you, Noah. Anything to add?
The only thing I would add is that in the short term, methane is a more damaging gas than CO2, to be fair, so it's vital that we capture it, certainly. In terms of pumping it from Portulita, creating gas and pumping it into the grid, I'm not sure that would work because of the variety of farms it all comes from. So we have a network of farms that produce every day. I'm not sure whether the same would work in terms of delivery to a point where you can create the gas and pump it to the grid. So it depends on the infrastructure, really, I would suggest.
Other questions? We've got the man at the back there with his hand up there. And then I'll come to you next, yeah.
Ian Thomas, Meridian Infrastructure. We actually invest in biomass plants in Europe rather than in the UK. Kind of no-brainer to me. Biomass should be used for generation. We've had ROCs working for a number of years. Why is the government, either the previous government or this government, nervous about extending them? Is it because they're too expensive? Is it a better way to finance them? Should they be standalone without any support? What is the reason? And then, to me, go to government with a solution, not go to them with a moan. So what is the solution?
What do you reckon, Eddie?
We have presented a solution. The solution is simple. It's transitional support from 2027, because ultimately we're unable to get a revenue stream from carbon capture because the infrastructure is not there. So we're going to be left with a gap for somewhere between 27 and mid-2030s, after which we should be self-sufficient in terms of being able to get a revenue stream from carbon capture. So I think we've suggested they give us transitional support, be that an extension of the ROCs or a CFD in reality. So there is a solution there. It's quite a simple solution, but I think it's a cost issue, to be fair. And it's an indirect tax, effectively, on the bills of consumers. And I think that it's not a direct tax, it's an indirect cost. So I think that's it, to be fair. And when the policy was made, probably back in 2010, 2011, 2012, when they said incumbents can only keep the ROCs till 2027, and the maximum you're going to keep it is 20 years, I think they were assuming that costs would go down, which is true of solar and wind. The cost of production have gone down in terms of infrastructure costs. We've got high running costs, so you've got the capital cost of the build, and you've got the running costs. the running costs have remained where they are, they haven't come down, so it's manpower, maintenance, and it's fuel. So yeah, I think it's a cost issue.
Thank you. Anything you'd like to add now?
Well, I think it is also a matter of focus, isn't it? And obviously, it's early days. A lot. We've spoken already about some of the sort of regulatory side challenges that you're facing, but it's. I think there has also been just. We've had to win an argument. We've had to win the argument on renewables, sadly. But with that has come a lot, of course, of focus on. Not necessarily on the baseload and the grid, which are obviously areas that we have to emphasise, but just getting that commitment to renewable generation capacity in place, of course, has taken a huge lift. Obviously, proud to be part of a government now that is is backing that, and it certainly has enormous opportunities. For my constituency, but also, yeah, the grid and the baseload is where we now need to put more focus into. I think this is part of the mix, as I've said, and I think it's not just the regulatory aspects. It's how do we get our institutions that we're setting up now, GB Energy and the National Wealth Fund, to also recognise that as part of the investment need and the landscape that we need to support as well, because I think it's fair to say that those institutions will be kind of steering as much as perhaps the department and DESNZ is steering itself, in the sense of the whole point of those institutions is to develop the knowledge and the policy kind of views from the ground up. I think that's what industrial strategy ultimately is. So we have to factor this into the baseload conversation.
I would also add that the biomass strategy document said that biomass should end unless it's abated, and we're quite happy to do the carbon capture, but we're not in a position to invest all that money without a known revenue stream and an infrastructure which we can store it, transport and storage, and it's not there yet. So it's quite hard to say you need to transition to X without giving you the stepping stones to get there. It does want a leap of faith, really. So I think that's vital for us. I think this
very good. We had a question here, and then I'll go to this gentleman next. Yes. So the lady in the orange. Yes. Yes, please. Right into the mic. Okay.
Thank you. Hi. I'm Larissa Lockwood from Global Action Plan, and we do a lot of work on air pollution, and we've been looking at woody biomass primarily on this, because not only is it a sort of climate disaster, but the air quality impact of the facilities where they're creating the wood pellets that we then burn in drags are really destroying communities in the southern United States. The air quality impacts from those facilities are horrendous. There was a delegation over recently, and they were really heartbreaking stories. So I know we're not talking about drags today, which is bad for people and planet, but I'm genuinely curious what the air quality impacts are of the type of biomass we're talking about today, the sort of agricultural residues, and also looking at sort of what tightening of air quality targets in the UK might mean for the industry. Because there's quite a big discussion going on about how the UK needs to align with WHO targets for air quality, like the European Union is looking at. And what would that mean for your industry if that happened in the UK?
Well, we work to environmental permits, so I don't really want to think that we've been generating since the mid-90s and have made no changes in that time. That would be appalling. So in 2005 we upgraded all our stations to WID, the Waste Incineration Directive, and last year our permits were changed to the IED, Industrial Emissions Directive. So we are meeting all the standards that have got tighter over the years, that are dictated initially by Europe, and I think the IED is a European legislation as well, which has been rolled out. So I would say that the air dispersion models would suggest that any issues are minimal, I would suggest. Minimal and getting better all the time.
Okay, anything you want to add?
Well, obviously I'm not at the coal face, so...
it's not coal. It's not coal.
No pun intended.
Good point.
So, yeah, it's good to hear, obviously, about some of the technological and regulatory changes that have obviously taken place. But I think it's also important not to conflate sort of, obviously, wood burners in the home, which are really unregulated in a certain sense. I mean, there will be restrictions, but they're not regulated in the same way. So there's obviously a lot of air quality problems arising from those, and I think this is probably where some of the perhaps nervousness to really push forward with this comes from, and we have to continue to make sure that balance is struck. Whereas, I think we are, as said, as outlined at the start, just entering a sort of black hole, and we can't sort of bury our head in the sand over any of this either.
Thank you. Now, just before I go to the next question, who has a question? So we've got 1, 2, 3. So we'll go for this gentleman here at the front. Just at the front, yes, sorry, apologies. And then we'll go back to you, and then we'll come to you last. Yeah.
Thank you, Joseph Powell for Veolia. We're a waste manager, water services provider, and an energy generator too. Going back to the point on renewables obligation, how long do you think the transitional period needs to last, in particular when other revenue streams from CCS aren't really available, particularly when you go from pre-feed to implementation can take 8 years, perhaps, so we're a long way
I'm thinking 8 years, to be fair. I'm saying from 27 to mid-30s, so probably 2035.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Right, nice and quick. Yeah, at the back.
Yeah, sorry, Alan Jones, South Derbyshire, CLP. I mean, as I understand it, you are paying industries to take their waste from them. A lot of other industries are actually paying people to take their waste and deal with it. I mean, is there not a case for saying we look, as a government looks at what industries it wants to support in its waste disposal, and I mean, give you the opportunity to make money on dealing with that waste?
I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think the real issue is the limited margins that the poultry industry makes, and we buy straw as well, and you need to give an incentive for a farmer to, and there's costs to baling, storing, and stacking straw for 12 months that we'll take over the next period. So, I mean, there's a genuine cost to the straw, and to say, do all that and pay us to take it isn't going to work. And in the poultry industry, they haven't got the money. They work on very fine margins, and unless the power of Tesco's and the supermarkets changes in that dynamic, they want a bird of this shape and this price. So that's the margins that the guys who work with in the poultry industry. So I think ultimately they'll take a decision. The cheapest option to get rid of their waste will be land spreading, and someone will store it and spread it, and it is unfortunately what will happen.
Okay, anything you'd like to add?
No, more of a question. Does that? I mean, that must depend quite significantly on the feedstock, because a lot of my previous experience has been with the rice husk, for example, and other byproducts where the farmers are literally paying to have these have these products taken away from them. So, but interesting to hear that's actually quite a challenge.
And it's not only the price of the product, there's haulage as well. So you've got to get it from A to B to the station. So there is a cost to that, which is probably more than the cost of the litter itself, to be fair.
Yeah. And our final question today.
Hello, I'm Greg Williams from Evero. We're a similar sized company to Melton, but we use waste wood. 2 cheeky quick questions. Eddie, you mentioned the impact on cost. Have you got a figure for like how, if you were to not need a subsidy from DesNet and you've treated this as a waste management issue, what would it do to the cost of a chicken if we had like a similar approach in terms of EPR, extended producer responsibility that definitely applies to plastics? And for the 2 MPs, you've had a very easy ride today, so let me put you on the spot. One of the risks with waste management in the UK is we don't have the solutions in the UK. The waste gets exported, like the colleague from Eskom was just mentioning. So would you support a ban on the export of waste to make sure that we dealt with our own mess in the UK?
Oh, very good. Eddie, would you like to answer your question first?
I'm going to, if I can sidestep it and ask you what the price of the bird
was.
Oh,
there you go. Remember. Fine, yes. Yeah.
I can't remember. We did look at it. I mean, it added quite a bit percentage-wise on their costs. Yeah, 20%.
Okay, no, very good.
No, that's quite shocking. But yeah, to address that question, I mean, obviously we can't do anything overnight in that respect. We would, the side effects of that would be pretty unthinkable. But I think I've made no bones about my views on the exporting and outsourcing of not just emissions, but waste as well. It is a huge problem, and it also in turn contributes to more emissions, even if they're not counted as our own. So it is shocking when you get into the detail of that, and I'd be happy to champion a move away from that if we can.
Do you have any cost implications for that? What would happen if we were to just ban all export of waste?
Well, in the short term, it would make waste management more expensive,
yeah.
which would particularly hit local authorities.
Yes.
So very mindful of the impact of that in local government finances. But in the long term, if we were to drive investment into those facilities in the UK, particularly the recycling aspect, it should pay for itself. Especially, to Noah's point, if you add the carbon costs of shipping your waste overseas and the environmental impact of those externalities, in the long term, treating our waste in the UK would be cost-effective.
I think there's also an interesting example on when China has, for example, introduced waste bans of various sorts, because actually they're finding that the sort of margins that they get from processing this is just not worth the pain that it causes and all of the other problems. So when there have been bans, actually that has had quite positive knock-on effects for industry. So I think there is an economical way forward, and there are the sort of developing countries of this world will not be happy to remain the world's rubbish dump forever, as we've sort of is the situation we've created. So I really do think we need to get a handle on moving away from that.
Okay, given what you've said about costs and the pressure on local authorities, I'm fortunate enough to be the neighbouring MP to Rachel Reeves. I'll ask the Chancellor her opinion. Yes. Come back to me and I'll let you know what the answer is. Yes. Right, that concludes our event today. I want to start by thanking our amazing panel. Thank you so much to Eddie. Thank you so much to Noah. And thank you so much as well to Perran, who stepped in at the last minute. But I especially want to thank you as well. The questions were excellent and obviously dominated most of the time. And one of the reasons that I selected this event to chair, the first event that I've ever chaired at a conference, is because I wanted to learn far more about this than I actually knew beforehand, and I certainly have. So thank you so much for your questions. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your time today.